Institute for Asia within the broader Ash Center. I also run a lot of our Asia Energy and Sustainability Initiative. So that's broader. It's well outside of China. It also looks at a lot of our Indonesia, Vietnam, many other areas in Southeast Asia, for example. So what part of the joy of my job is the diversity of work that we do here. This is an example of work that we have partnership we've long had with Taiwan, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we try to look at important questions that are both domestic, so domestic political economy questions, and international, right, so international relations questions across a whole broad range of issues, from climate to conflict. So today we have a particularly interesting topic, which is rethinking UN Resolution 2758 as a way of thinking about Taiwan's own international participation. And we're quite interested in different perspectives, right, on this issue. So before I jump into that, let me just say a few ground rules, some initial comments. One is the Ash Center acknowledges the land on which Harvard University sits is the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. We also recognize the continuing presence of the neighboring Wampanoag and Nipmuc nations. Second, today's discussion is being recorded for educational purposes and it will be available on the Ash Center's YouTube channel. We also may have a photographer present. Clearly, it's all about the interaction, so we're going to reserve the last 15, 20 minutes to respond to questions from all of you, the audience. We'd like to thank the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies at Harvard for co-sponsoring today's event. Turning to our guests today, we are quite fortunate, not just for the guests themselves, but also for many of you. So just looking at the audience, we have Professor Kelman here, so people from the faculty, also G. We have Charles and Astrid from TECO here in Boston. We have Dennis Guap, one of our fellows who probably most of you know from the discussion on Hong Kong last week. So we can bring in a lot of real-world practitioner experience from you, the audience, but also, which I think is one of the unique aspects of this wonderful convening platform of Harvard, but also our guests, of course, today. So let me just quickly introduce them. One, we have Johnson Sen Chiang, is Deputy Representative of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, TECRO, in the United States. We have Ryan Haas, who's joining virtually. And thank you, Ryan, for doing that. He's fortunately is often willing to join, which is important. We're very grateful. He is currently now director of the Brookings Institution Thornton China Center, and he's former director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolian affairs at the White House National Security Council, as most of you probably know, during the Obama administration. And then we have our own Wenqi Yu, who is an Ash Center non-resident research fellow, so one of ours, and an international affairs journalist with Taiwan-based TVBS television, in addition to many other things that she does. So I think we have quite an interesting lineup in terms of perspectives, and we have a wonderful group in terms of all of you and your own perspectives. So with that, I will turn it over to Wenqi.
Well, I don't think we need more introduction. Why don't we just go ahead to start with Johnson, who can give us the background of Resolution 2758.
Well, okay. Well, thank you, Edward, for your kind introduction. And I'm glad to be back here. First time here at Canada School 11 years ago as a fellow student. Great to be back here again. And thank you for having me here as well. Well, I wanna be here to be, as a student. So I gotta share with you my thoughts from a capacity as a private opinion. So I hope I can have a two-way traffic with you. Any comments, questions, back to me. I want to talk about the nature of UN Resolution 2758. I think most scholars and most people think it's a vote about the credentials. It's a vote about Chinese representation at the UN. It's not a vote about status of Taiwan. It's not a vote about if there is a consensus about China's Beijing's one China principle. look at the history, from 1949 to 1971, 22 years. All the supporters of PRC UN membership, they had argued this is an issue about credentials. Who represented China at the UN? They don't argue for a new membership vote because they know it's going to lose the votes if counted by the numbers of diplomatic recognitions. Because in 1949, ROC Taiwan had more diplomatic recognitions than Beijing. And all the way down to 1970, I think Taiwan had about 10 to 20 more recognitions than the PRC. But 1971 is turning point of year. In 1971, Taiwan's diplomatic recognitions 58, down from 65 the year ahead, and PRC gained 11. They got 65. So the year of 1971 is the turning point. I think that somehow provided background for the vote, 2758. However, the passage of that resolution doesn't mean it's a vote on the status of Taiwan. Look at the language of the resolution. It talks about to restore all the rights of the PRC to the UN. It's not to admit PRC into the UN and to expel. I think there's a very emotional language in the negative. I think the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek is not a representative of Taiwan. Expel Representative Chiang Kai-shek out of UN and all its system member organizations. So look at the language.
Johnson, if I may interrupt, I'm not sure if everyone here actually has the background of, that fight, but maybe you can go back even a little bit more, sort of what was the fight about? Like, why is there a fight between essentially ROC and PRC when it comes to who represents China?
Well, there's a civil war, right? There's a civil war. And in 1949, the communists took over mainland China. So the ROC government moved to Taiwan in 1949. And the communists took over mainland. And the PRC, People's Republic of China, established the government in Beijing. So there's a split. The government, ROC government on Taiwan and the PRC government on Beijing. So that started the fight. Starting from 1949, Zhou Enlai talked to UN leadership. PRC wanted to join UN and to expel ROC. So that's the start of the fight.
So there at the UN at that time, China is one seat, right? But it's represented by Chiang Kai-shek's government in Taiwan, essentially, right?
Well, ROC was a founding member of UN, and ROC still hold a seat till 1971, under the name of China.
Mm-hmm. It's very complicated.
Very complicated.
Yes,
very
there's
complicated.
ROC, there's Taiwan, there's China, there's PRC.
It's I can have another 3 hours to talk to you about this. So I don't want to destroy your appetite about lunch. So let me get back to this. So it's not a vote about status of Taiwan. It's a vote about the credentials. It's about who represented China. In that regard, the resolution 2758 doesn't create so-called institutional consensus or international consensus of Beijing's one China principle, which means Taiwan's a part of PRC. It's not a vote about this. So that's the nature of 2758. And over the past few years, we have witnessed there's a overwhelmingly misuse of or misinterpretation of 2758 from Beijing. And you think a lot of dangers about this. in addition to excluding Taiwan from participation into international organizations, uh, Beijing is trying to unilaterally change the status quo of the status of Taiwan Strait through this misinterpretation of 2758 to support their false claims over Taiwan Strait and the waters around Taiwan. If you look at their arguments responding to military exercise, October 15th, they call Joint Sword 2024B. Yeah, and they quoted 2758 as one of the reasons they strengthened their military use against Taiwan. And in that regard, we should be very much alarmed by this tendency of this misinterpretation. Because if they claim Taiwan Strait, which is which is international water, as their internal waters, they're gonna increase the possibility of a military conflict across Taiwan Strait. And and also recently, they also claimed that Miyako Strait, which is north of Taiwan, connecting with Taiwan Strait, is in between Taiwan and Okinawa, Japan. They said that there's no EEZ in Miyako Strait. And down the south of Taiwan, there's a Bashi Channel. You see a lot of military exercises there from the PLA, So it's a kind of lawfare from Beijing to justify their military use, their military threats against Taiwan and the neighbors.
And the reason they use that to claim, is it ultimately about the claim that Taiwan is part of the PRC, according to them, right? That's why they can justify a lot of their actions.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to bring that out.
Yeah. That's a kind of their equation, right? They said UN Resolution 1258 is linked with Beijing's One China principle, which means that Taiwan's a part of PRC. And so the status of Taiwan being resolved once for all, which is not true. Yeah. So that's, I think, that's the worst danger. But there are some others like, taking that position, actually Beijing reduced the possibility of cross-strait dialogues about, resolutions of differences. If their position is there's no dialogue about Taiwan, you're gonna accept Taiwan's a part of PRC as a precondition to dialogue. I don't think there's any appetite from Taipei side to talk about this. Yeah.
So if I may just again to break it down for our audience here, PRC again. PRC and China are two different concepts, right? I'm using PRC here to be very exact, which is represented by the regime in Beijing. PRC's claim that Taiwan is part of the PRC, and they tend to quote this particular resolution to justify their claim. Now, the Taiwan side disputes that claim, and therefore there are all these ongoing disputes that you can see on the surface. And later on, we're going to invite, obviously, Ryan, who used to serve a very important position in the government, to tell you about the U.S. position, right? So the One China principle is also different from the United States One China policy. I hope, Ryan, later you can explain what is the difference. That's very important. But essentially, that's what today's conversation is about. Like, why are we talking about this? Because there's a difference in terms of what Beijing claims, what the rest of the world recognizes, agrees, and disputes about.
Mhm.
Right. Okay.
But interestingly, 2758 passed in 1971.
Mhm.
Uh, you look at some studies from some scholars about this. I think from Beijing, occasionally they didn't think the issue about Taiwan be resolved through 2758. However, I think especially after Xi Jinping took power, there was an increased volume from Beijing about 2758.
So
And especially over the past few years, you see there's a tendency of prevalence, misuse, misquotation
and
of
so
2758.
I think it would be interesting to also maybe share a little bit about the background of the history. In 1971, right, at that time, even the leaders in Beijing had a different idea about what Taiwan is. I mean, according to things I read, right, it didn't seem that Zhou Enlai at that time actually thinks that Taiwan's status has been determined. They didn't really claim that PRC includes Taiwan. Is that right?
I think from Beijing, they always said Taiwan's a part of China, and PRC is the only legal government representing China. So there's a kind of three parts,
Right.
theory. Taiwan's a part of China. The PRC represents whole China, the legal government of China, and just Taiwan is a part of PRC. That's their equation. Yeah, oversimplified.
But was there a conversation about potentially there could be ROC as well as PRC both represented at the UN? I remember there was some.
Actually, October 25th, 1971, it's a long day debate about the Chinese representation.
Right.
There are four proposals that particular day about this debate. One is 2758, proposed by Albania, and U.S. proposed two. One is about, explosion. Well, a founding member, ROC, is an important issue. But that requires 2/3 majority vote. Another proposal by the U.S. is dual representation. Yeah, as you mentioned, ROC, PRC, both in UN.
Was that in one of the U.S. resolution at the time?
Proposal.
Okay.
Well, that one didn't vote because the passage 2758, and also before the vote, ROC announced withdrawal. So there's a no vote about U.S. proposal. Another one is from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia proposed a vote to moratorium on debates of this representation issue.
And there was those conversations because also Korea, for example, is represented by two Koreas, right? So it's not unprecedented. And Germany is represented by two Germanys. I mean, if you're East and West. And so this is not unprecedented in terms of the discussion, right? But in the end.
Yeah. I mean, you can have a lot of what if questions. What if Chiang Kai-shek changed his mind to have a much more flexibility? That might be another outcome. You might have another what if, like,
And can you explain that? What does that mean? Chiang Kai-shek could have been more flexible.
Well, because if you look at the several documents declassified and, for the public to read, there's a kind of communication between Washington and Taipei about the possibility of a dual representation. However, pretty much rejected by Chiang Kai-shek. But to the very end of this kind of conversation, pretty close to 1971, I think somehow, I think the leadership in Taipei tried to be more accommodating to this idea, but the problem is too late. You didn't have enough votes to mobilize your troops to support this idea. And also, another what if is, I mean, when the vote of 2758 took place in New York, Kissinger was in Beijing, meeting with the Chinese leadership. And, that's a signal to the other member states where the U.S. might stand. You know, that's a Cold War period.
Right.
And a lot of, I would say, you know, balance of power game in between. The U.S. tried to court Chinese on their side against the Soviets, and also they wanted the Chinese to talk to the Vietnam to stop the war. You know, a lot of balance of power game in between this. But the problem is, I think this kind of balance of power game is pretty much secrecy based. So a lot of distrust and miscommunication or speculation between Taiwan and Washington about this important issue. This is not a what if kind of question. Yeah.
Essentially, it was the changing political environment internationally that the U.S. in its own national interest has a different need, but was willing to try to accommodate and figure out a way for ROC to continue to be represented. However, all these issues happen. So today, fast forward to today, Taiwan has not been able to have meaningful participation, for decades now. I wonder if we can move to Ryan now. We can come back to Johnson, and to talk a little bit about today how Taiwan's participation, whether it's in the UN or other related international organizations, has faced a lot of challenges. And in particular, the U.S., how the U.S. has been helping or trying to help Taiwan.
Well, Winchi, thank you for all of this. It's great to be with you and Johnson and Edward. I'm really happy to follow Johnson because I think he did a great service in laying out the background, the context, and the meaning, frankly, of UN Resolution 2758. I don't have any amendments or additions to offer. I'm not a lawyer myself, and so I approach questions related to UN Resolution 2758 with humility. But I agree with the point that Johnson made, that the resolution only recognizes China as the representative of China in the United Nations without endorsing or opposing China's claims over Taiwan. And I think that's an important point to make. I would encourage everyone in the room to read UN Resolution 2758 and don't feel overwhelmed by it. I did it this morning. It takes about 20 seconds because it's extremely short.
Very short.
But if I could turn slides, what I would like to do in just a few minutes, and I'll be deliberately efficient with these comments so that we can be guided by your interest and not mine in this discussion. But I'd like to really just touch on 4 questions that sort of build out from the foundation that Johnson already laid. The questions: why Taiwan's international participation is so critical now, what factors move the discussion abroad about Taiwan's international participation, where are there potential opportunities or issue areas where Taiwan can play an expanding role, and then finally, what role can America play in support of these efforts? Next slide. So I think that it's reasonable to suggest that Beijing has been steadily ratcheting up pressure on Taiwan, both militarily, but also in terms of coercion without violence as well. So actions below the threshold of violence that really sort of squeeze Taiwan further and further. And Beijing has invested, immense resources into developing these capabilities, and it seems determined to use them both to induce anxiety inside Taiwan, but also in an effort to try to deter the United States and also others from getting more involved in Taiwan and cross-strait issues. And as long as Beijing believes that it can squeeze Taiwan at little cost or risk to itself, I expect that Beijing will continue to do so. Because Beijing, really wants to try to generate a feeling inside Taiwan that resistance is futile, that Taiwan should succumb to Chinese pressure in order to avoid conflict. And so we're at a really important moment right now. And to deal with this rising pressure from China, I think it's important for Taiwan's leaders to really galvanize efforts around a few lines of activity. The first is strengthening Taiwan's overall defense posture and deterrence. And that's sort of apart from the discussion today. But the second is the core of our discussion today of demonstrating that greater Chinese pressure on Taiwan will generate greater global support for Taiwan. In other words, Taiwan's leaders need to find ways to demonstrate that Beijing's efforts to squeeze Taiwan further and further are going to produce the opposite of its intended results. Instead of inducing a feeling of resignation inside Taiwan, that China's pressure is causing other countries to step forward and speak up in support of sustaining an equilibrium of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Next slide, please. And so, colleagues and I in Washington and elsewhere have been looking at what works to move in this direction. And I had an opportunity earlier this year to help co-lead a task force along with my friend Jude Blanchett and Lily McElwee at CSIS that included experts from Asia, Canada, Europe, Africa. I mean, it was a very diverse set of perspectives, looking at the question of what has the most salience, what does the most work to advance discussions about Taiwan's international participations. And what we learned through these discussions over many months was that interests have more of an effect than ideology in motivating other countries to act on Taiwan. And I think that part of this is understandable. There's a lot of crisis fatigue around the world today with wars in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East underway, climate-induced crises, the rapid effects of technology, et cetera, et cetera. So in this context, trying to frame Taiwan as a morality play of good versus evil, or presenting Taiwan in ideological terms as a democracy standing up to autocracy, just doesn't seem to generate the type of effects in other countries who are contending with multitudes of other challenges of their own. Now, to be clear, I am sympathetic with my friends in Taiwan who face unrelenting pressure from across the strait. I acknowledge the strains this induces. I also feel that there is morality involved in Beijing's efforts to bully Taiwan. But, unfortunately, my feelings don't count for much in this broader question about generating greater global support. And so what we found through these convenings is that specific concrete interests are more likely to drive international engagement with Taiwan. So identifying how instability in the Taiwan Strait would affect specific communities around the world is likely to serve as a more effective stimulus for expanding stakeholder buy-in on issues related to Taiwan. And every leader in the world cares about job creation for their people. They value the health of their people. And so Taiwan is uniquely positioned to help address these issues. For example, during COVID, Taiwan's provision of personal protective equipment was a powerful endorsement for the campaign that Taiwan can help. And I think that we should find ways to be opportunistic about identifying future openings to reinforce this theme that Taiwan can help when future calamities strike or diseases spread. But I also think that there's opportunities for leaders in Taipei and Washington and elsewhere to elevate efforts to raise global public awareness about Taiwan's centrality to the global economy. Taiwan's investments in Southeast Asia, in Germany, Japan, India, the United States, and elsewhere, they really should be celebrated. Next slide, please. And so this leads to sort of the question, what issues should we focus on if we're going to focus pragmatically on specific interest over ideology? Look, I recognize, as Johnson pointed out, that Taiwan is limited in contributing to UN-led activities. This is a hindrance, but I would argue it's less of a hindrance now than it was before, because the United Nations, frankly, is becoming less of a leading actor in addressing a lot of the world's most pressing challenges. Much more of the work, for better or worse, is falling to individual governments, to groupings of countries, to non-governmental organizations, and to leading philanthropists. And as this change takes place, I hope that it opens space for Taiwan to play a more active role on emerging challenges, whether it's supply chain resilience, pandemic preparedness and response, the clean energy transition, or development and deployment of next generation defense technologies. In all these areas and others, Taiwan has very unique contributions to offer. And I think that it should do so. And it should also partner with groupings of countries. The Quad countries of Australia, India, Japan, and the United States offer, a potential platform for Taiwan to be a contributor to addressing regional and transnational challenges. And I also just want to take one moment to, recognize and applaud the vision that Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin, has for active diplomacy. This idea that Taiwan will make itself a critical enabler of success in other countries that are seeking to incubate science parks or semiconductor manufacturing and packaging or employment of smart technologies. I think that it's wise and visionary of Foreign Minister Lin to really try to package these efforts together in ways that advance Taiwan's international space. Next slide, please. So we're in the United States, obviously today. So a natural question is, what can the United States be doing to help support Taiwan's expansion of international space? I would put three propositions on the table for answering this question. The first is that the United States can play a unique role in helping to raise global awareness of Taiwan's indispensability to the global economy. And I think that the Biden administration deserves credit for making strides in this regard. They've invested considerably in getting more countries involved, more countries to speak out publicly about the strength of their interest in upholding peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. This has also been seen in a growing number of parliamentary delegations that have visited Taiwan, ministerial level delegations that have traveled to Taiwan, but also in the expanding array of countries that have exercised militarily in and around the Taiwan Strait in recent months and years. I think all these efforts carry cumulative weight. They reinforce that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is not an internal issue to China. It is not an annex of US-China competition. It is a matter of global concern with implications for every community connected to the global economy. And this is an important point. I think Johnson stressed it well. It helps disabuse leaders in Beijing of believing that they can isolate Taiwan. It undercuts Beijing's attempts to persuade the people in Taiwan that they are alone, left to their own devices to deal with China's mounting pressure. So that's one idea. The second is that Washington can play a supportive role in ensuring that platforms are available for Taiwan to make meaningful contributions to global challenges. And this was the idea behind what is now called the Global Training and Cooperation Framework. It began as a modest experiment between the United States and Taiwan. It now has full partners in Japan, Australia, Canada. And by my last count, I think that 132 countries have participated in activities that are organized by the Global Cooperation Training Framework, which is designed to provide space for Taiwan to contribute in areas where it has special expertise, to build capacity on issues like public health or disaster relief or cybersecurity. And the success of these efforts, I think, punctures Beijing's hope of isolating and imposing its will on Taiwan. And the third area that I would offer is that the United States can use its position to help focus the international narrative around the sources of instability in the Taiwan Strait. And this connects directly back to the conversation that Wen-Chi was having with Johnson a moment ago about helping raise awareness globally that an overwhelming majority of the Taiwan people favor the status quo, that there is no near-term plan or path for Taiwan to change its status, that Taiwan's president, its democratically elected president, William Lai, has made clear that he intends to uphold the ROC Constitution, and that Taiwan's interests are in preserving the status quo, where Beijing's goal is to revise that status quo. Now, to be clear, this is all in America's interest. None of what I've described is a favor to Taiwan or the people of Taiwan. America benefits from a strong and confident Taiwan that acts as a force for stability. And America's interests are also served by having Taiwan enjoy greater global support. The more invested the rest of the world is in speaking up for Taiwan's stability and success, the higher the cost to Beijing of taking steps to seek to alter the status quo. So last slide, please. Just to briefly wrap up, I'm really looking forward to the conversation and happy to take it any direction you want, Wen-Chi, but I think one of the most important tasks for leaders in Taipei and Washington is to build a case for Taiwan to enjoy the dignity and respect it deserves on the world stage. We should look for ways to harness Beijing's pressure to make progress on this front. And this is frankly one of the most important tasks for policymakers, diplomats, strategists in Washington and Taipei in the coming years. But I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
as always, Ryan is always so articulate. And for those who didn't know, Ryan was the China director in the White House, serving for a couple years at the National Security Council. So he's really versed in those related issues. And I'm supposed to be a respondent and then also a moderator. So I'm going to respond with a few points and then pose questions to both Ryan and Johnson. And I also want to recognize that we have a Taiwanese perspective here. We have an American perspective here. And obviously, we're missing the PRC perspective here as well. I think that's an important point to point out. So I think, some of you may wonder, right? This resolution was passed in 1971. It's over 50 years ago. So obviously interpretations have evolved over time. Government's leadership also has changed over time. So it's not really a new issue. Why are we talking about it right now? The discussion has never stopped over the years. However, there does seem to be a renewed effort to look at the actual interpretation of Resolution 2758. So I think, that's going to be my first question to both of you. Why is there a renewed effort to look at this issue now? And also, I think another thing I want to point out is that is Taiwan part of China? And the question of, is Taiwan part of PRC? I think these are two very important questions for people to think about, right? And the dispute today, at least on the international sort of arena, is more about whether Taiwan is part of PRC. And I think that touches on, you guys are all in school and students. It's a legal issue, it's a, political issue, obviously. But the concept of sovereignty as well as representation of the government, right, matters. And this is fundamentally, I think, at the end of the day, the whole Taiwan and China issue.
I'm curious, would the Kuomintang's position be that Taiwan is not part of the PRC, but is part of China? Would that be the Kuomintang position or not?
Yes or no?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I think KMT's position is Taiwan definitely not a part of PRC. It's a part of China, but their China is ROC.
Oh,
So I think, that's the second question I do want to ask about, which is there a political consensus in Taiwan on the interpretation of Resolution 2758, right? Because I do think there is slight difference in terms of how the KMT and the DPP views this issue. Slight difference. It's how much push you do, right? And then I do want to point out as well, especially when Ryan was in the government, some people may argue that Taiwan for a while did have some meaningful participation in the UN with the permission of Beijing, right? So, for example, the World Health Organization every year has an assembly meeting, WHA, and Taiwan for a while was allowed to participate as an observer. But that's because Beijing allowed it. So fundamentally, I guess my question is, some people argue in Taiwan that when Taipei has a better relationship with Beijing, it does open doors to Taiwan's international participation because at the end of the day, some people believe Beijing holds the key. However, some people argue that is not ultimately the right way to approach this issue because why does Taipei have to always rely on Beijing's okay in order to get that access? I would like you both to also discuss this because I think Taiwan, even though Beijing, Taipei has this very special relationship, but the US plays a huge role in it. Even though the US doesn't have an official diplomatic relationship with Taipei, but the US voice does matter. And so what we're seeing, and going back to my first question, the renewed effort to look at this partially is because the US supports this effort. So 3 questions I just threw out. I don't know who wants to respond first.
So go ahead, Ryan, or you want me?
I will follow you, Johnson.
Okay. All those 3 are great questions. Well, I think that I'd rather pay more attention on the on the brighter side about what Taiwan can contribute and how much contribution we can do to international community, rather than arguing the whole day about historian perspective 2758. However, we got to talk about this because of this kind of, over the past few years, this prevalent, overwhelmed misinterpretation of 2758 from Beijing side. Give you an example. OECD is a part of a U.S. system organization, and there's a kind of small technical group about agriculture, and well, Taiwan's pretty good about agriculture technology. I think Taiwan probably is the top of this kind of areas in Asia Pacific. So some members want to invite Taiwan, and some say, oh no, we're going to anger China. And China always say, you cannot invite Taiwan to any UN-related organizations because there's a resolution, 2758. And Taiwan's a part of PRC, so Taiwan's not entitled to be any part of this. That's the source of the problem, to block Taiwan's participation into any this kind of international organizations. But, our view is we want to cooperate. We want to get past this. And Taiwan, as you mentioned, Taiwan's democracy right now. And back in 1971, Taiwan was under martial law. It's pretty much one-party control society. And now Taiwan's democracy. So people have all different kinds of views. And I don't think anyone in Taiwan would like to pay more attention 24 hours a day on the historical problem of 2758. People want to move forward, to see what we can do with AI and supply chain, semiconductors, the economic cooperation. I think Ryan mentioned very well in his presentation about many areas that Taiwan can contribute. And Taiwan is a top 7 trading partner with the U.S. I think the U.S. has, all the good reasons to support Taiwan, to help Taiwan to be more engaged with the international community.
So you're saying timing is now is because increasingly Taiwan is feeling the squeeze from Beijing, using Resolution 2075, and therefore, Taiwan wants to talk about this as an issue.
Well, frankly, we have been increasingly squeezed diplomatically from Beijing all the way down, all the way up from 49 until today. It's not a new theme, but I mean, the narratives and the way to present it, very different. Very different. Look at websites of Chinese embassies all over the world. Look at the consul generals all over the world. There's always a page about resolution 2758 in websites. It's unprecedented. Yeah. And why do they want to do this? I mean, what they want to achieve? We may think about this. Yeah. And I think our view is don't misuse, don't misquote, don't misinterpret it. And that's focused on stability and keep the stability of status quo and move on. And frankly speaking, as you mentioned earlier, that Taiwan's democracy, so we may have different views domestically about this issue. DPP proposed a resolution in our Congress about a 2758, and KMT proposed their resolution.
How is that different?
I would say don't overjudge their differences, because Taiwan's democracy, they're always different on any kinds of issues. They want to have their own brains. So DPP doesn't want to own anything that KMT has already owned. They want their own things. Yeah. So what DPP proposed resolution, they are much more saying that 2758 is nothing to do with Taiwan. So Taiwan should be accepted by the UN. And the KMT said ROC has rejected 2758 from the very beginning in 1971. And ROC should return to UN. And the third party, Taiwan People Party, its own story is their proposal as well. Taiwan should be included in international organizations, including WHO, ICAO, and also some other UN-related system organizations. There's kind of I think common ground among these different parties in Taiwan, which is Resolution 2758 excludes Taiwan's participation into international organizations. This is not acceptable by the Taiwan public as a whole, as a society. Yeah, that is common ground, but they do have differences on this, on that. I mean, they want to have their own brains. Yeah.
The last question about whether when the relationship is better between Taipei and Beijing helps Taiwan's participation in the international community.
I think if we have a better communication between both sides of Taiwan Strait, I think it certainly helps. But I don't want to regard that as a primary source of Taiwan being invited into WHO or ICAO. There was a time Taiwan was invited. But you got to think about this, with the background of a lot of support, primarily from the US and its like-minded partners all together being arguing for Taiwan's participation. It's been there for a long time. It's been there for a long time. And this kind of voices is getting stronger now. Like WHO, I think this year in May, I think we got over several dozens of countries supporting Taiwan, participating into WHO. If not a join, they're talking about a meaningful participation. Trying to avoid the sensitivity sovereignty issue. Yeah, that's a pretty practical method. Yeah.
Ryan?
Well, Wenqi, I would have just a few quick reactions to your questions. The first is, I don't think that it's making news to suggest that there is not a consensus inside Taiwan on the question that you raised about UN 2758. As Johnson indicated, different political parties have different perspectives on this, and that's okay. Taiwan's a vibrant, healthy democracy with a range of views on a lot of questions, just like the United States. Why are more people focused on UN Resolution 2758 now than in the past, given that this is a resolution from many decades ago? I think it's because actions generate reactions. And Beijing has made a pretty aggressive push to get other countries to accept their view of the One China principle, which is an argument that they predicate in part upon UN Resolution 2758. And the more aggressive Beijing has been in pushing this, the more it has compelled people in Taiwan and the United States and elsewhere to try to set the record straight, to try to let facts speak for themselves about what UN Resolution 2758 is and what it is not. And so that's how I think about why this is an issue that is gaining in prominence. And then on the final question about are closer cross-strait relations a predicate for Taiwan to have more involvement in UN related bodies, I guess that I think as a general principle, it's important for the United States to adhere to its policy of encouraging Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organizations that do not require statehood for membership. But that's the starting point, not the ending point of American efforts. In other words, if we can find ways to have Taiwan contribute more meaningfully to the World Health Organization, ICAO, Interpol, or others, the world will be a better place because Taiwan has important contributions to offer. But if that does not become possible, then we shouldn't just accept and resign ourselves to the reality that Taiwan is boxed in. We should look for other platforms, other opportunities for Taiwan to make meaningful contributions and to generate dignity and respect for the contributions that they're offering. And that's what I think has been an innovation over the past 8 years, eight or so years that I hope that we can build on going forward.
Want to open it up for our audience? You had the hand up first.
Just a super quick clarification question on the DPP's proposal on this. I understand it's pretty clear that the KMT was saying ROC was part of this, we never accepted it, we want to go back. Is DPP's proposal that Taiwan's never part of this, so it's never part of UN, it's now trying to ascend to UN as Taiwan? Is that the proposal? I just want to have a accurate understanding of their proposal.
I think DPP's proposal is about the resolution itself. Yeah. Resolution 2258 has nothing to do with the Taiwan status. So Taiwan should be accepted by the UN.
Taiwan as a sovereign body?
Well, I don't think they go to the details about this. That's a very interesting part.
Sensitive question.
Very interesting part. Well, all of them want to get support from the other side of the party. So yeah, it's kind of competition.
So they're staying strategically fuzzy about that.
You can ask DPP. I don't speak for them, but I can try to analyze from my perspective. I think there's a kind of ambiguity might be helpful for them to get some support from the other side of the aisle. Yeah, I think.
Dennis.
Yeah, so thank you for this excellent talk. I know we don't have a PRC perspective here. We can give you a Hong Kong perspective. First of all, I think the experience of the Hong Kong people is that we lost the right to self-determination back in the 1960s. And that actually, looking back, was the pivotal point for Hong Kong and what happened afterwards. So I don't hear much about Taiwan lawmakers and officials talking about the right to self-determination under the UN Charter. Now, that may be for very good political reason, you don't want to go there. But there's a second argument under the international customary law, which is favorable to Taiwan, which is under the Montevideo Convention. Taiwan satisfied all 4 criteria of an independent sovereign nation. Number 1, a civilian government. Number 2, a permanent population. Number 3, a territorial geographical territory. And number 4, the ability to enter into relations with other independent sovereign nations. So all 4 criteria are satisfied. But I don't hear much about that from the Taiwanese government or lawmakers. Is that intentional because it's politically sensitive? Or are you refraining from making these international legal arguments because you don't think it will help?
I think this is a very good recommendation. We should bring back to improve our narratives. Actually, this is a great question. Because China always talking about Taiwan's domestic affairs. We are against any foreign intervention. But back to the point, I think especially in the 60s, the principle of self-determination goes hand in hand with this rejection of foreign intervention. They go together. But China picks the part in favor of their view. They skip the part not in their favor. Self-determination goes together with non-interference from foreign outside force. Yeah, this is the kind of process of decolonization during the 60s. A lot of countries out of their colonial status to be a new member states of the community, international community. So I mean, this kind of idea, we should not, just to pick the part in favor of the view of our own. We should look at it in a much more comprehensive way. Yeah. But China never talk about a self-determination. They never talk about it. You can have self-determination on many things. Xinjiang debate, Hong Kong, or people on Taiwan about their future. It's a big no-nos to political leadership in Beijing. I don't think they wanted anything like this happen.
And I also wanted to say, since, self-determination, I mean, lots of Taiwanese scholars actually have been studying this, right, for a long time. And for a while, it became a more popular idea, but it was 20 years ago. And I think politically and under especially, the first DPP government, it became more of a controversial issue and even a point of tension in terms of Taiwan's relationship with the US. And since then, you're right, we have not seen that much discussion around self-determination. The language is being used so publicly. You can also say, a lot of people say the DPP has changed its position, when it comes to Taiwan sovereignty, etc. But I wanted to say, it's not like it wasn't discussed ever. It was discussed quite a bit in the past. I don't know if Ryan wants to respond or you want to wait for the next round of questions.
No, I think you guys have covered it well. I'll just pause.
I see more hands. Yes.
Yeah, I haven't followed this too recently, but my understanding is when President Lai was running for office, he talked a lot about Taiwan is already an independent state. We don't need to declare ourselves independent. And my understanding is that's a very different formulation we saw in the past, like President Tsai, who would say that about the Republic of China, parentheses Taiwan, where you saw this like Republic of China is already a sovereign state. I was wondering if that read is correct. It's a different formulation under President Lai. And if so, I guess what is the thought process behind that?
Oh, okay.
Can we can we collect a few questions so we can get through most of them? Yes.
Thank you for this talk. Ryan, I wanted to ask you a little bit about like the strategic ambiguity of the US administration towards Taiwan. We've seen that change a little bit under the Biden administration, and just like how you expect that to change or develop under whatever the future administration will be. And Johnson, I wanted to ask you the effect of Taiwan losing some of its formal diplomatic allies, how that's affected Taiwan's ability to engage in the international space.
One more.
Thank you for your insightful speech. I want to ask if has Taiwan ever considered the one country, two system of Hong Kong in history? Thank you.
Okay. That's it. Let's respond to this round first. You want to go ahead?
Okay. The third one, easier one. So let me get back to this first. I mean, it's simply not popular in Taiwan politics, and no one wants to be next Hong Kong of today. You can see when Beijing keeps promoting one country to system formula, using Hong Kong example, it just
Doesn't fly.
of course not. People are actually more concerned about loss of freedom for people in Hong Kong and the suppression over their civilian and on their freedom of speech. So I mean, those kind of issues being widely discussed in Taiwan. So I don't think the formula of one country to system is very attractive at all, or any major political parties in Taiwan would accept it. So it's basically no market at all in Taiwan. And so back to your question about President Lai's speech, we talk about Taiwan has been independent, no need to declare independence. I think the language is about he talks about ROC Constitution. It's a very important part in his speech. I think he refers to the history, the background of Taiwan in the name of official country name, ROC. Yeah. In that regard, Taiwan has been independent since from founded, well, he mentioned this again during his October 10th speech.
1911.
Right, founded 113 years ago, right, in mainland China. I think he's trying to be, to be more historically related to the history of the country, ROC. And President Tsai mentioned some parts of this as well in her speech. So I don't think there's a division between Lion and Tsai about this. He's not declaring independence of Taiwan from ROC. Yeah, he's still talking about Taiwan, the context of ROC constitution. I think Ryan mentioned about this earlier, which is a very important element in his speech. But the problem is, his goodwill is received by Beijing or not. Looks like not received by Beijing, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. I think that back to the question about a dialogue, cross-strait dialogue. We want to have a dialogue with Beijing, but now China only talks to the people they like. They talk to KMT. They don't talk to DPP. Sometimes they talk with the DPP, or sometimes they don't, depending on political situation in Taiwan. So I think our view is, why don't you talk to everyone? Why don't you talk to all the parties in Taiwan to get a better view about what Taiwanese people think about? So far, not yet. Yeah. And what is the third one? Yeah.
Or just how the effect of like Taiwan losing formal diplomatic allies, how that's affected its ability to engage internationally.
Yeah, those diplomatic allies are great supporter of Taiwan participation into international organizations, like UN system organizations. They always talked about we wanted Taiwan in this, we want to be Taiwan participation. Now, I think there's a broader perspective in terms of our cooperation with the US, with like-minded countries. For example, like South Pacific, we have 3 diplomatic allies in the region, and many of them actually they don't have internet access. So now Taiwan's working together with the US, with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand to build up undersea cables to provide internet access to countries like Tuvalu, which has diplomatic ties with Taiwan. So I think, this is the kind of thing that we want to demonstrate that Taiwan can work together with like-minded partners to help to support countries, especially in Global South. Now is a very important issue right now. What the Global South thinks about the issues globally. Yeah, I think Taiwan wants to be part of this.
Ryan?
Well, I think that I received one question about strategic ambiguity versus strategic clarity. And I appreciate the question because I think it comes in the context of President Biden stating 4 times publicly that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense, making him the first U.S. president to say so while in office. And each time he said it, his advisors stated on the record that there's no change in American policy. And so it's sort of created a question as to what's going on. If President Biden is saying something that no one has said before, how is that not a departure in policy? The way that I think about it, in case it's useful, is that strategic ambiguity, this idea that the United States will be ambiguous about the nature of its response to a potential military activity in the Taiwan Strait, it shouldn't be looked at as a binary between like a light switch between on or off strategic ambiguity versus strategic clarity, but more so as a continuum where there's different gradations of clarity about how the United States would respond to a threat to stability in the Taiwan Strait. And I think if you look at it in that context, President Biden certainly has been more clear than some of his predecessors have been on this question. But ultimately, it's going to be dependent upon the situation and the circumstances. the second half of the question was, how would a future administration deal with this question of strategic ambiguity or strategic clarity? And as I look at former President Trump and some of his statements and Vice President Harris, I don't think that either of them are inclined to speak in an absolute sense. Vice President Harris is a lawyer by training. She's pretty disciplined about not being drawn into discussions about future hypothetical scenarios. And she sticks to a pretty time-tested script of what America's position and views are on the importance of maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. I think that she will largely adhere to the need to uphold principles, that boundaries should not be redrawn by force, which is a statement that she's made often and I think believes in pretty deeply. I think that it's also noteworthy that she has repeated on multiple occasions the importance of the United States maintaining the most lethal fighting force in the world, including last night in her speech in the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. Former President Trump, I don't think that he likes to bind himself to anything. I think that he views unpredictability and projections of strength as an asset in keeping others off balance. And I think that he will try to preserve and protect that space for his own unpredictability rather than providing categorical, definitive statements about what he would or would not do in the event of a conflict. So that's a long way of saying that this is an interesting discussion for all of us to have in the academic and think tank setting. It's not a conversation that has penetrated the walls of the policy community as thoroughly as it has in our setting.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. I was reading a report the other day published by Taiwan University indicating the identity of Taiwanese. And it's quite shocked me. I think like within that report, like 40% of the people who believe they are only Taiwanese, 50, I think around 50 to 60. And around like 30% of people who believe they are both Taiwanese and Chinese. And there are about like 5 to 6% of people who solely believe that they are Chinese. And it's ironic if you go to the Chinatown of Boston, you can see the ROC's flag everywhere. It's actually like Taiwan is representing like China in Boston Chinatown. And if you look at the largest like airline in Taiwan, is China Airline, the largest communication telecom company is Zhonghua Dianxin, like China Telecom. So my question is, with like a lot of like voices right now indicating, okay, Taiwan is an independent country, we are now related with China, but there's also like a certain percentage of the people who still believe that Taiwan is, no matter you call it culturally, like people connection, like a lot of people do believe that they are connected with China. And my question is, as a policy maker, how you view like those kind of attitude, and do you view that as a major trend in the future that can build a better connection across the street?
Let's get more questions and then we can respond. Yes. Yes, you.
So I have a simplified question, and so practically what happens if Xi Jinping gets up tomorrow and says that we recognize Taiwan as a sovereign country and it can enter the UN? It's not as if that the other groups within China claiming various degrees of self-determination are not under the monopoly of force of the central government. So, you know, I mean, he gets a Nobel Peace Prize, all of these things happen. And it makes the West look so bad. And we also get a leg up with the global South. So, I mean, what prevents them from doing this domestically? Because I feel there are no international negative consequences for doing this.
Right. Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to follow on the strategic ambiguity question. I think we have, and this is both to, I'd like to hear that both the Taiwan and the US side of things. We've kind of seen and observed the trend of declining US capability and will to support Taiwan. Capability in terms of diplomatic and economic, but especially military. Will in terms of polling has shown that a majority of Americans are not willing to send forces to Taiwan if there's an invasion. We have seen de-risking, trying to move semiconductor facilities onshore, such as the opening of the TSMC plant in Arizona. And trends are that they are trying to increase or decrease their reliance on Taiwan. So I'd like to ask, like, do you see this as a concern? What do you think going forward, especially as Ryan, you mentioned, there's a 50-50 chance that we get a president that is unwilling to commit to supporting allies in the region. And is there anything you think should be done to arrest this trend? Thank you.
Right, we'll respond and then we have to wrap up.
Okay. I think that the kind of polling in Taiwan, I think you mentioned about stronger Taiwan identity in Taiwan society. Look at the younger generation. They have a way much more stronger Taiwan identity compared to their parents or grandparents. Pretty natural, frankly speaking. They grew up in Taiwan society, grew up in democracy. So, I mean, naturally, they pretty concerned about human rights abuses issues in China. They concerned about their future. However, if say the polling is about what do you think about the future of Taiwan's relationship across Taiwan Strait with China? I think over 80% prefer status quo, keep it the way it is. I think people want to make sure that their freedom being protected and the way of democracy alive in Taiwan without being threatened or coerced. Also, that somehow reflect that we want to pay more attention on our capacity to be able to strengthen our defense and also keep our democracy as well. And nowadays, you see a lot of kind of gray zone attacks from the other side of Taiwan Strait. It's a kind of a new attacks under the threshold of war. They send coastal guards around Taiwan waters. They use social media to insert their misinformation to our society, trying to influence our democracy. I mean, those kind of new things happened in Taiwan. So I think people want to make sure Taiwan status quo as a democracy, as its own government, as the capability to engage with international community to keep it where it is. However, it doesn't mean they're going to declare Taiwan independence tomorrow, away from ROC. So there's a kind of distinction between these two kind of different pollings. Yeah. Also something related to, I think, one of the questions about the U.S. Well, I think that it's very important to think about the role of U.S. leadership in Indo-Pacific. Yeah. Back to 1971, the vote on Resolution 2758. I mean, people in Taiwan felt abandoned. And you follow up Japan's shock. Japan switched in 1972 after Resolution 2758. That part of history, pretty painful. And I think we should learn something from that. And we have been improved about this in our engagement with the US. And I can tell you, we have quite a lot of dialogues with Washington right now. I think maybe more than any other countries. We have quite a lot. And those dialogues cover pretty broad range of issues. So I think that it really depends on how the American people think. What kind of role of leadership the U.S. should play in the Indo-Pacific. You can imagine if U.S. withdrawal, who's going to take place? Who's going to replace them? It's not a hard question to think about. And we hope the continuity of the U.S. leadership and also the strengthening of its allies and partners can continue, which is, we think, important. It also plays a deterrence to the other side of the Taiwan Strait. We have allies, we have friends, we have partners. We want to keep the status quo. I mean, this kind of message is very, very important. Yeah. And a lot of things should really up to the choice of American people. And I know there's a kind of voice right now in this country, pretty much skeptical about the role the U.S. should play in global affairs. But right now, everything is connected. Some say that, Taiwan 1,000 miles away from the U.S., and Taiwan closer with China. So why should we bother, considering Taiwan? Wow. Taiwan doorstep is at your doorstep. Look at the chips at your cell phones. Look at all the AI supply chain. There's a war in Taiwan Strait. It quickly tarnished global economy by 10% of GDP globally. $10 trillion, quite a lot, way much bigger than Ukraine, the financial crisis. It's very connected with you personally. And the question about Xi Jinping, I'm a little bit confused about the question. If you can.
Basically saying if Xi Jinping just said, let Taiwan be an independent country.
Oh.
I guess that's hypothetical and probably, I don't know if we need to answer that. But I'm cognizant of the time, so maybe let's have Ryan respond so we can wrap up.
Well, thank you. I know that we're over time and I see that people need to leave, so I will be extremely brief, but I will make two quick points in response to the question about America's declining will or capability. The first is that if you look at the history of the United States is pretty reluctant to engage itself in conflicts until it gets punched in the face, and then it reacts extraordinarily strongly. We had President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, probably the most powerful orator in America's 20th century history as president. As Germany was marching across Asia, Japan was sweeping across. Germany was marching across Europe. Japan was sweeping across Asia. Not even he could inspire the American people to get involved in World War II until Pearl Harbor was invaded, and then the United States responded overwhelmingly. And so I would just caution against drawing premature conclusions about how the United States would or would not react to a crisis in the Taiwan Strait. And then second, I would, and finally, just say that America is not engaged in Taiwan out of altruism. This isn't charity. This is America's own self-interest that guide our deep, enduring involvement in the situation in the Taiwan Strait. And those interests are going to continue to guide us to be very active and engaged going forward. But thank you for the opportunity to be with you, Johnson and Winchie, and everyone in the room. It's really been a great conversation. I'm delighted to be part of it.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope this session has offered some interesting academic questions to you all to ponder. And I wanted to thank Johnson in particular. I personally think being a Taiwanese diplomat is one of the hardest jobs on earth because of its special status. And so I applaud your efforts and all these other diplomats from Taiwan. It's a tough battle to fight. But it will always require creative thinking when it comes to Taiwan, because it is one of the hardest issues to think about. So hopefully some of you will be able to offer some really interesting creative solutions. Thank you again for paying attention.